So before we get started, we have a couple of expectations for you. Number one is we're going to utilize the 1, 3, and 5 rule. There are some of us in this space who are 5s. We like to talk. We like to have our voices heard. There are also some of us in this space who are 1s. We don't always like to chat. We don't always like to say every single thing on our mind. So the goal for this presentation is for all of us to be a 3 or to hold our questions until the end. So how do you be a 3? For those of us who are a 5, like me, I'm not going to say every single thing on my mind. I'm going to hold my questions to make space for those who are a 1 so they can also ask questions that they have so that they have the space. So what we want to do is bring ourselves down to a 3. And those of us who are 1s, we want to raise ourselves up to a 3. So ask a little bit more of ourselves. We also want to be respectful of our experiences. All of us have different experiences in this space. All of us have come to this space with different backgrounds, different understandings of diversity, equity, inclusion in gaming, and all of us have different specializations. And maybe some of us have similar specializations, but our experiences are different. So we want to respect that. Finally, we're going to speak from our own experiences and not tell other people's stories unless we have expressed permissions. Remember, speak from your experiences, not others.
For the sake of anyone who came in recently, we did have a 4th co-panelist. They unfortunately could not attend physically, so we tried to record their slides and segments so that they could still share their insights and topics in that regard. So to help with those expectations, we're going to be using the Poll Everywhere application through this panel. If you all could please pull out your phone or similar mobile device, and you can either try to scan the QR code here or open a web browser and go to pollev.com/CCROSON. When you get there, it may hit like a register, login, give your name screen. Just hit skip to get past that. And then you'll be using your mobile device to essentially respond to question and prompts that we give you all throughout the presentation so we can kind of get your ideas, your questions, your experiences in that regard. So each slide will have those connection means. I'll give this just another second or two for folks to hop on if needed, but we will hop to our first test question. So what are the default options that you typically change in a game to make it more comfortable for you? Do you invert the controls? Do you adjust video or volume settings? Do you disable or enable certain features? Join the poll everywhere via the URL there or the QR code. Type in your response, and when you submit it, we will see what everyone's preferences are coming up on screen. Brightness, very good. I don't know where everyone stands on the whole light versus dark mode debate, but, you know, being able to choose that is certainly a game changer. I have a lot of people saying audio, closed captionings, lowering the audio so you're not deafened at startup or anything, customizing controls, mouse sensitivity. Yeah, so there are a lot of things that you can, okay, not just changing the controller settings, but making sure it's the right layout for you. That is a very, very important thing. Just getting it to exact fit the parameters that you want for your situation. Thank you all. We're going to go ahead, but keep your devices on hand. Not every slide is a poll slide, but they are peppered in throughout the presentation. So thank you all for these great responses. Turn off motion blur. Ah, the favorite of all demo rooms. I thought you were going to say, every game I work on, I disable from the root level motion blur. I just find that code and delete it outright. So why this topic? So in a very, 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 very small nutshell, think like pistachio or smaller, we believe that inclusive design is an important principle for developers, educators, and similar who create content for the consumption of an audience. In this video clip, the quote is given that inclusive design is to design a diversity of ways for people to participate in an experience, coming up with the best varied way to ensure the widest range of individuals can participate in something. And borrowing from our good friends, the Pokemon evolution chart, this represents what inclusive design can be. We start with kind of like the baseline base form, the base necessity of having accessibility. Over time, that will level up and grow into universal design, where those kind of add-ons or legal requirements start getting thought of from the beginner, from the design level. And then as that is kind of shared and opened up to different people with different experiences and different backgrounds, it reaches its final form of inclusive design. It also helps if you have a link cable. Throughout all of this is the important field of representation, representation across age, gender, orientation, background, all those different things, and trying to ensure that what you are making pertains to people across as broad a spectrum as you can, while still focusing it on the audience that you want to hit in that iteration. Pause as we swap to the next recorded section.
What are some things that we can keep in mind when being inclusive in our design process? So when we think about the planning process of gaming, there are 3 phases that we can identify. And those don't have to just be with gaming. They can also be with any planning aspect that you have in your career or in your personal life. Doesn't matter. It keeps us with an open mind as we design, test, market, and more. So my favorite phase of the planning process is the blue sky planning. I love that. It's what Disney uses when they start any of their planning processes for their rides, theme parks, movies, anything. So when we are in the blue sky planning phase, anything is possible. Our budgets are limitless. We have enough staff. We have enough product. We don't have anything to worry about. We can do whatever we want with our game. This is the easiest aspect. You have no guardrails. You have no limits. The world is your oyster. So this is the phase where we should be thinking about how to make our game diverse, inclusive to as many audiences as humanly possible. And our next step is asking ourselves, who actually cares? So who cares about the game and who cares about who's represented in the game? So when you're making the blue sky planning phase, you should be thinking about color. What kinds of controllers are we going to be using? Can these controllers be mapped onto third-party controllers so that more people have access to them? What about our captions? What style, what font are they going to be in? What about language? How many languages can we translate this game in? How many voice actors do we need? How many designers do we need? These are some things that we can think about in the who cares phase. Who cares about these sorts of things, right? So who will care when these decisions are made? In other words, who is most impacted by the decisions that you make in planning, executing, developing this game? So while it's true that we cannot plan for every single customer and every single consumer, what we can do is keep those who sit at the margins in mind when we're making our games. So we're thinking about individuals who have disabilities. We're thinking about individuals who maybe don't see themselves represented in media as well. And then my final question, this final phase that I've identified is, who are you? And how do your identities play a role in developing this game? In the next slide, I'll ask you to complete a document, and I'll share a little bit about that document as well. But there are different identity sectors that we think about and that are privy to us, that are important to us when we're thinking about gaming and when we are thinking about purchasing a game and when we are developing a game. Do we see ourselves represented in this piece of media? And is it even important for ourselves to see ourselves represented in this piece of media? And to best understand ourselves is to best understand our customers.
Quill?
So as I stated before, we must understand ourselves to understand our audiences. So what we're going to ask you to do is to complete a poll everywhere where you will see this document. This is called the social identity wheel. And in the center of that wheel, you see some pink around the center. That is saliency. So these are things that are important to you. What is most salient to your identity? And then you've got that wider white side of that circle. These are things that are not super important to you. And I want you to think about this in terms of yourself. You being a customer, thinking about your favorite game, the game that you will always go back to and play. Does race play a factor in how you interact with that game and how you see yourself represented or non-represented? What about gender? What about sexuality? What about language? What about captions? What about accessibility? How do these things play a role in the way that you interact with games?
Right. So once more on your handy dandy mobile device, you should now be able to see that social identity wheel. If you want to zoom in, you should be able to better read some of the wheels and spokes around it. Once more, you can scan the QR code or go to pollev.com/CCROSON in your browser. But while you're there, we want to ask you all to choose 2 of these quadrants. Please choose one in the outer section, that white spoke of the wheel, that is something that is less important to you. And then please choose something in that inner circle, that pink section of the wheel, that is important to you. And ideally, we should be able to kind of see what matters to you most, and then what are things that you're kind of the least concerned with when it comes to social identities or other metrics. So among them, for the ones that are kind of a pass, we have some about race, religion, spirituality, possibly sexuality orientation. Or more on that side, we have some that are important about sexuality orientation, a lot about ability, race and background, physical appearance and body image. Gender is one that's getting some hits on both the important and the less important side. Cool. Oh. Let me reset that once more so that we can give a fresh pass at that so everyone gets a turn. Thank you all. If you have not had a chance to go in, give it a shot. If you had a chance to go in, thank you so much for your contribution. We have just a little bit longer. My goodness. Look at this fill up. It's like me trying to aim at a dartboard. More, again, on the kind of the physical, the ability and sexuality orientation, we're getting some strong hits for that is important to people, along with race, gender. And as far as things that are less important, things like age, things like ethnicity, things like religion and spirituality are on the lower end of that scale. So thank you all for sharing these with us. We really appreciate that. Again, remember to keep those devices out. We will be using them continued throughout the presentation, as we will hop along to the next slide.
Why accessibility matter? So the reason accessibility matter is because everyone is temporarily able until they're not. And also accessibility features can benefit people who are not necessarily disabled. My biggest example is if your game can be played with one hand, you allows people to use the other hands to stroke their cat, take care of the baby, or eat food. There's all those possibilities you can do for your gaming style with accessibility feature. And the other reason to me that makes this something I really believed in is having done a lot of virtual reality demo in different settings over the year. I have learned firsthand that people will not play a game or a device if it makes them severe physical discomfort. It doesn't matter how fun the game is. I do know a few people who will play game while sick, but that's very small section. So if your game creates physical discomfort for people, and again, video game is entertainment. It's not, you don't need it to live. So and also you are dealing with a market where we have so many games coming out every year. The market is so saturated. People usually don't choose games that makes them discomfort when they have choice of to play a game that makes them happy. Also, the talking point I love to give game executive is imagine how much more people will buy your game if your game is accessible to them. Also, personally, I do believe as someone who is a disabled gamer who joined this space because of my disability and not able to find a game that is accessible for me when years ago, I do believe game accessibility is a human rights issue. I feel accessibility at least should be a conversation you have when you make entertainment media.
Recording.
So while we can celebrate diversity and we can talk about inclusion, there must be action behind this. So we can say that we are diverse and we can say that we are inclusive with stickers and with buttons and making social media posts, but the actions are something else. So one of my favorite examples of inclusivity in gaming is one of my favorite games at the moment, Farm. It is an indie game and it allows the gamer to choose a myriad of tracks. And one of my favorite updates that they made to the game, as someone with ADHD, is extending the time of the game by effectively slowing the game down. So instead of having I think it was about 12 minutes in a day, you have about 35 minutes or so in a day to complete your task, run through your dungeons, do the things you need to do in order to be successful as you deem necessary within the 24-hour time period of the game. Something I also enjoy about Faith Farm is that this farm simulator, this adventure simulator, allows the customization of the character. So this is the voice, this is their appearance, this includes their pronouns. This includes how muscular they are, how non-muscular they are. There are so many different ways to customize the game and to customize the character. As someone who identifies as an African American woman, I really appreciate having the ability to go into the game at pretty much any point and say, I want to change my skin color based on, for me anyway, the season of the game. If it's summertime, I've got more of warm undertones, a deeper shade of brown, maybe a little bit of purple in there if I'm feeling a little quirky. Whereas in the wintertime, I'm pulling it back. I'm maybe going to add a little bit of yellow, maybe some blue hues in there, and that skin tone and complexion to make sure that character not only represents the reality of me, but also the gaming reality of myself as well. So that is another way where inclusivity matters.
Our final recorded section from Quill.
So why does inclusivity matter? Sometimes we can think about diversity and inclusion as the same thing, but they're really not. Inclusivity helps us to amplify diversity. So what inclusivity is it covers a wide scope, a wider scope of accommodations for people, of celebrating people, of bringing people into the space and making sure that they feel like they are a part of what we are making, whereas diversity brings them to the table and doesn't really offer them a plate of food to eat. It brings them into the GameStop and says, we don't actually carry your system here, and leaves it at that, right? So this includes language, this includes testers, this includes colors, this includes controllers, which Leo will talk a little bit about later, and this includes systems. It includes so much more than that I just haven't listed because it's such a wide scope.
Game. Like I know for myself, since I'm physically disabled, it's definitely a lot.
I find myself geared towards a platform that I can refund the game if it's not accessible, especially like if it's like a relatively painless process where I don't have to talk to a human or a bot to refund my game, because so many times I'm like, I think I can play this game, not sure. And I like being able to like play a demo and play like a little bit to be like, okay, I couldn't or I could, is very important.
So top of that list for you is the Nintendo Switch eShop, right? For easy use and simple refundability. Love you, Nintendo, but that place is a dumpster fire.
not at all, that's cool too. You know, and I think that this is, oh, okay, sorry. And so I think that this really is important to show, especially if there's any game developers in the room, because sometimes in the stress of trying to develop a game, sometimes the accessibility gets lost in the sauce. So hey, it is important. If you are developing a game.
On that note.
What accessibility features do you look for before deciding to purchase a game?
We know that Monica's a fan of easy refundability. So, and that's honestly a new one that I would have never considered if you hadn't said it here. So thank you for that.
Myself, having a simple control scheme is really important because you'll be seeing the Xbox adaptive controller in a bit. That's what I use. And since I have to make the buttons very big and spaced out from each other, the less of them there are, the more enjoyability I get from the game. We're seeing here. Captions and subtitles, yes, so incredibly important.
Especially if we can make the captions bigger.
Tekken still needs to do this. I know Harada doesn't want me to ask him for anything, but if he could do that, that would be great. Color scheme that doesn't hurt my eyes. So understandable, like the ability to change color schemes.
A lot of captions, a lot of remapping, a lot of controller customizations and such, which are all great. Thank you all. We'll do another quick reset. Keep those ideas a-coming. We weren't anticipating such nuggets of gold. Thank you.
The button mapping options, especially like for folks who either can't reach certain parts of the controller or using an adaptive controller, is so important. Speed and difficulty modes, yes, especially for me, like as a physically disabled gamer, and I'll get into it later. It's so important to have that options because it literally takes me longer to get from A to B.
Like there are some quality of life feature like navigations and an easy mode that doesn't make you feel bad about playing easy mode. I am really surprised that there's game literally shame you for choosing a mode that's good for them because that's such a bad business decision.
Right. Any last thoughts? And then we're going to hop along to the next slide. So get those final ideas in now, everyone. All right, thank you so much for this insight. This has been amazing.
So I'll talk a little bit about the Xbox adaptive controller, which is something that I use. I'm holding it up right now. This works natively on Xbox One, Xbox Series X and S, and on PC. It's customizable to what you need, and it works with many first-party and third-party peripherals. And so what I mean by that is that there's some ports on the back of this controller here that correspond with every single button on the controller. And there's also USB ports on the side for the joysticks. And so here I have an external peripheral, so it's just a button. And suppose I want this button to be my A button. I would just go to the back of the controller here, find the A port, plug it in, and now I can place this button that's now my A button anywhere. So like I could put it on this Velcro board, and now I have my A button. And I can place like the Velcro board, at my feet or in my lap, like wherever I would need it to go. And what's also great is that there's a co-pilot mode on Xbox One and Xbox Series X and S that allow two controllers to work as one. And the way that I use that mode is I put a regular Xbox controller on the ground. I steady the controller with one foot, and then I use my other foot to control the joystick on the controller. And then I have all my buttons plugged into my Xbox adaptive controller in my lap. And That's how I play games. And what's nice too about the controller is it came in accessible packaging. So when it came in the mail, it was just like a tab to open, kind of like you open like a food package or something. Like I didn't have to get a knife or anything. And the packaging for the controller itself was also accessible. It was opened using a fabric tab. So that's really cool. And just this central hub is $100. So what about other consoles? Because I know not everyone plays Xbox. So in my previous panel, I presented on Friday, which you can totally catch the recording for once it's posted. I did talk about the PlayStation Access controller as well as Nintendo's Hori Flex controller. But I also want to talk about adapters. So these help a controller intended for one console to work on another, and there's a picture of one on the slide. And these are vital for accessible gaming because once you find a gaming setup that works for you, you want to be able to take it to other consoles. And they're usually about $20 to $60. And just something to keep in mind is if you're going from Xbox to a Nintendo console or vice versa, the A and B buttons are going to be switched and the X and Y buttons are going to be switched. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the peripherals I was mentioning earlier. So here's some major T, and I apologize for the text being really small. So you can take a look at some of the prices of these peripherals. This is just a screenshot from Xbox.com. So if you look at the joystick that's in the top right corner, it's $310 just for a joystick. Like not even a whole controller, just a joystick.
One Nintendo Switch per joystick.
Yes, exactly. You could even get your Nintendo Switch and you can get a little game from the eShop with that too. And, there's also the, there's some buttons here on the left, the micro light switch, $95 for a singular button.
That's 1/3 of a Nintendo Switch.
Exactly. And then like another one, like $75 for a button for the AbleNet spec switch. So if you think about how many buttons are on a controller, this will add up fast. And obviously, I want whoever are making these peripherals to get paid, a livable and appropriate wage. And I just hope we can find a middle ground between, obviously that happening and these peripherals being financially accessible as well. So let's talk about the cheap stuff that I use. So this is part of the Logitech Adaptive Gaming Kit. With the kit, you get 7 buttons of varying sizes, 2 Velcro boards to attach them to, some Velcro stickers to put on the back of the buttons, which I've done here, and it comes with some stickers to decorate the buttons, which I don't do because I changed the setup. So it's so different between game to game. And the whole kit itself is $100, so that's significantly cheaper than $75 a button. I do want to point out that that's the Xbox version is $100. There is a smaller PlayStation version that comes with just 4 buttons and then PlayStation stickers to decorate them with, where it's more expensive per button, but the kit is less expensive, so obviously whatever you need for your needs. Something that I do want to say though is that the quality on these isn't the greatest. There are a lot of missed inputs, and because these have very thin wires, sometimes they can get caught underneath the buttons, and you miss inputs that way. And what I use for a joystick is the Hyperkin Trooper 2. This is about like $22 to $29. You just find it on eBay. and unfortunately, you get what you pay for. This is there's so many dead zones, and it's very clunky to control. Sometimes you plug it into your adaptive controller and it just decides not to work that day for no rhyme or reason that I can understand. Yeah, it's. I think we really need to look into how we can, have some more affordable options for folks who are using the Xbox Adaptive Controller. So, what are some settings you would like to see included in more games?
And how many Nintendo Switches should it cost someone to have them?
Yes, it's colorblind modes, and actually tested by those who live with colorblindness, because I've heard of some colorblind modes like just not working. It's more lighting and color control. Like for me, like the flashing lights, of certain like older games, like really give me a headache. That's why I was so happy to see that on the MAGFest 2 re-release that you could you can reduce them. You can't turn them off completely, unfortunately, but you can like significantly reduce them. It's fantastic.
Thank you guys for taking that suggestion and running with it. I love you, MAGFest. Never change. Quickly reset the timer so you can keep going. Going to be living in a Nintendo Switch-based economy.
Yes. Buttons, slowing down the game progression. That's like totally huge for me.
Surprised like game speed is like I agree it's such an important feature, but so few games have it. And like I've again go back to Switch. I actually have played a lot of old arcade or like Nintendo games where game speed, adjustable game speed is the only way I can play the game. And it's just such a refreshing experience. And I'm like, oh, I don't have to just get good or like become super reactive.
And sorry, go ahead.
But whoever put the pre-launch options, so agree. It's like be able to just set it like right as the game opens. Like I love that.
I saw someone talk about like menus and navigation. That's a big thing that I think about when I do my work in instructional design. And I do want to share that one of our final slides is a link to a resources document where you can find a copy of this presentation and the resources that we used when researching and finding it. And amongst there, Monica, I think you were the one who found it. There's like there's a UI library where you can look at all of the interfaces for different games, different applications, different designs, and kind of get an idea of which ones work, which ones don't work, and kind of how you can have those templates to pull from an inspiration in any work that you may be doing.
Game UI database. It's one of my favorite resources to use.
And you only have to give us 4 switches each for that link to that site.
So just in case we have any software designers in the room, other than Monica, of course. So here's some ways that you can make your games a little bit more accessible to folks who use accessible controllers like myself. Is one to have the option to slow down the game. I know some people were mentioning it before on the poll everywhere. And, like as you can see, like there's way more space in between these buttons than there are in like a regular controller. So it literally takes me longer to get from A to B. And an example of a game that has this, and I thought was implemented very well for at least, my situation with my disability, was Another Crab's Treasure. It's a Soul-like that has this option. Like I don't think I would be able to play a Souls-like ever until, they made this game and made this have that accessibility function. So really cool. Also, too, having optional auto camera, and make it optional because I know sometimes it can make people feel motion sick. But as you can see, the joystick situation, it's not particularly great. And so if I can get rid of one of those, that is nice. And also too, there are some folks who cannot use 2 joysticks at once, so that, is helpful to them. And a game that has a really good auto camera is actually Pokemon Scarlet. I very rarely needed to use a second joystick in an open world game, which is incredible. So we love that. And also, I'd love to see the optional removal of button mashing. It hurts me to press buttons. I don't want to do it over and over and over again. And, and for some folks too, like being able to press a button that fast, isn't an option for them. So just having, the option to go in and say, hey, I just want to tap the button once, is just fine.
This also applies to QTE. If your game have QTE, please give people a way to navigate around that.
Yes, exactly. And also too, I know we're touching on it before, but having simple control schemes can be really helpful too. Like every time that a game uses a button, I have to find a button to plug into my adaptive controller. And also too, there's, some folks may not be able to utilize that many buttons as a part of their disability. And also too, like just because a game has simple controls doesn't mean it's not a complex game. Like think about Tetris, like that game, like the amount of buttons you use, you can count on one hand. And it's an incredibly complex game. And also too, having D-pad support can be really helpful. Not only because the joystick situation, is kind of sus, but also too, there are some folks out there who may have difficulty using a joystick. And, if you have D-pad support in your game, then someone could, use 4 buttons instead of, 1 joystick. And an example of a game that has great D-pad support is actually Mario Kart 8. You can play that with a D-pad, which is so cool. And then the most important thing that software designers can do is to hire gamers with disabilities. I was touching on this before, with talking about the color blindness modes. As a person with disabilities, I know what works for me and what doesn't work for me. And getting that input is invaluable to your game. And also, too, people like myself with disabilities, we're used to, one, advocating for ourselves, being assertive, and having to be creative to get the job done. So these are all things you definitely want on your team. And also, too, no team has ever suffered by having a more diverse group of people working on the game. So yeah, hire gamers with disabilities.
On that note, I want to pat myself on the back for remembering something, and that I never can remember. You have a phrase that you use that I love in this regard. It's not...
Nothing about us without us.
There you go.
Yes.
That's it. Nothing about us without us. That is awesome. I think very impactful and very good for other people that are not me to remember.
Yeah, so how do you design for accessibility? This is assume you do not have unlimited money where you can do everything you ever want. So like to me, it's like there's different ways for accessibility looks like. Like there's games like Balacho that is native accessible. In the case that you do not really need to hear anything to play the game. You do not necessarily need to see every color to play the game. And also one thing I really like to do is play, so I have this experience when I first came to America, I didn't really speak English, but I play a lot of games that I have access to, which is in English. So I get very good at playing game in language you don't understand, which is a really good way to get a feel about how good your accessibility is. And I highly recommend it if any game developer is try to play the game or try to have people play the game where they cannot understand everything, and see what kind of cue are they trying to trying to get and try to play the game. The good thing about if your game is native accessible, you can have your game accessible and people enjoy by across the globe. without having to like exactly have like accurate translation. However, it's also Balatro is a very special example because most games does not have the luxury. Like every game I work on couldn't just make it native accessible. So the second option is accessibility option menu. And this is really important because, for example, like Leo just said, they really like auto camera. And as someone who has severe motion sickness, auto camera is like the first thing I would turn off. And like everyone's condition is different. That's the joy and the challenge about accessibility is the more option you can give people, the more things they can do to make the game work for them. The other thing I want to say about accessibility menu is I have learned people is like a lot of people when they are not disabled or like they don't identify as disabled gamer, they do not look at accessibility menu unless it's prompted for them. So like I see more and more now is the first thing you do before you start a game is open accessibility menu, and I have the option to open it and to look at it because I have had a conversation with people about games where they will complain about like if the game being unplayable, and I was like, have you tried turn on that option? And they were shocked that it exists. And also like I would recommend to make accessibility menu accessible. There are like games where accessibility menu is like 100 options, you keep scrolling, and a lot of them has like so specific terminology where I need to open a second page of Google just to figure out what I need. So please make accessibility menu accessible to people who need like accessibility feature. The last thing is I want to focus on the mental health like element of accessibility design, which is one example is content warning, which I understand mental health, like content warning is a very tricky conversation because a lot of people feel like it spoiled them. So I will recommend something like I was a teenager ex-colonist where you play the game, the first question is, do you want to see the potential content warning? And if you say yes, you get a list of very vague description that this is a branch game, so you're probably not gonna see half of them. And if you would like, there's one list you were like really concerned, you can click into it and like it nested information into layers. So like people who do not need it can just skip ahead, but people who need it can find exactly what they need and make decision if this is the game they want to play. So this is like a really good example of like designing for accessibility. Another way is Grounded has this where like you can play, they have this spider enemy, which is kind of crucial for the game, but they have a way to turn the spider into a white blob for people who have arachnophobia. And that's like a good way to have a like psychological accessibility option without sacrifice the main theme of your game.
Accessible thing is Dell update alerts, so thank you presentation for that. So once again, just for a quick reminder, inclusive design, it basically stands on the shoulders of universal design, which stands on the broader and stronger shoulders of accessibility with representation running throughout. We're going to talk about a few of the elements that go into inclusive design. Before that, again, why is this important?
Why inclusivity matters? The reason inclusivity matters is because video game, especially American, like Western video game industry, has a long history where people assume the only people who play games are cisgender white men between a certain age demographic. There's a lot of like history about why this happened, has a lot to do with Toria Us, RIP. But the reality is, I think in 2025, everyone knows everyone play game. Like my mom, she insists she doesn't play game, but she spends hours on Candy Crush every day. So like, there's not everyone identifies gamers, but you can pretty much assume if you make a game, you'll have a wider demographic of audience who will like look at your game and decide if they want to play. So it's important, like inclusivity is actually important because of the history and because of there's so many game design conventions are based on this false assumption about who are we catering to. So now, like making game now means you need to be very aware about whether the design convention or the things you take for granted actually apply to the demographic you're trying to achieve. Also, just game dev team is still relatively homogenous. I am often the only non-man in a design team, in a system design team, and also sometimes the only non-white person in a system design team. So like I become actually aware about my difference and about like what people assume the player is and like how to expand that definition to make your game more inclusive. Also, just from as a person, human experience, it's good to be seen, it's good to be represented, it's good the game you purchase actually allow you to have the fantasy you want. So what does designing for inclusivity looks like? I kind of like use this example of different ways where like the first one is what you see on the screen, which is I think most common what people think about inclusivity or diversity is like, oh, we have a very diverse cast. This is definitely a great first step, but I would say that's not the end of it. And one thing I want to say is like I was a teenager as a colonist has like a very diverse cast across different representation, which fits perfectly for the story they're trying to tell. And then like you have things like Card Apocalypse, which I really love is because they have a protagonist that is a girl in a wheelchair. However, the game never make that as their whole identity. And that's like one thing, the older I get, the more I appreciate it, is the older you are, the more you realize, yes, your marginalized identity is who you are, but it's not all who you are. And being able to play a game where the identity, like you see representation without making it their whole identity, making it the whole storyline, and you see like she can just play with the kids like normal, and the only time you notice she has wheelchair is when they have to go downstairs and she has to go around the ramp, and that's it. So like it's really refreshing to play a game where like disability is portrayed in such like a respectful and like realistic way. And that's like also really good. But another thing is like inclusivity is not just what you see, but rather what's the player fantasy. Baldur's Gate 3 is a good example. Well, it's not perfect, but like games where you allows you to have like romance fantasy that is not heteronormative, that is not like exactly what like a Hallmark movie. It's really great because, like, as I said earlier, video game is entertainment. That's our job as game designer is to fulfill player fantasy. So we have to be aware that player fantasy are very diverse and everyone has very different fantasy. You should know this just walking around the hallway of MAGFest. And so being able to have your game, especially if your game is a role-play game, allow people to role-play the fantasy and role-play the life they want is so important to the success of like a game like Baldur's Gate. And poll everywhere question, what inclusivity features do you look for in game? You know, for me, having the option to have like queer romance, like if the game has romance, there's so many games where I'm like, everything is pointing I can have romance with this character, but I couldn't because my character is not the opposite gender of that character, and it's just a little bit sad.
I completely agree. I love when there's a non-binary gender option in games.
One thing that I know from Quill's recording that she really, really, really liked was the game Fae Farm, I think, because it has a lot of customization options, both in terms of player accessibility for the experience, but resetting the timer. Also in terms of customization options of like, okay, these are like authentic options that represent people who actually do look like this, rather than just kind of saying, what is Crayola black, Crayola brown, Crayola white, etc.
I like to play this game whenever there's a game has like character creation. I was like, can I create an Asian looking character? You would be surprised how often you couldn't, because they think that diversity is just skin color, but like for me as East Asian, it's like I have a different facial feature. I don't look like a slightly tanner person version of white people. And like it's like it's an interesting challenge. It's like, can I do it? Do you give me the option to do it?
Ellen, here the option to change your gender presentation, even like after the character creation screen. I absolutely love that. I know in Splatoon, you can do that. I remember you could do that from day one, which was really cool to see.
Just reset the timer another time, so if anybody has any other ideas, please let us know. Otherwise, we're going to hop along to the next slide in a few. Body size suggestion.
Yes.
Thank you so much.
Yes.
Good call. Good call. All right, we're going to hop ahead again. Thank you all so much for these ideas and insights. We really appreciate seeing and hearing this. So I'm going to give a quick rundown of some components that are good to think of when you are working on a project to make it more inclusive. One of the first ones being to provide and solicit feedback. Back in 2020, there was a documentary on the creation of the game Darkest Dungeon, personal favorite, in which they talk about a scene where they got a lot of very loud feedback from a very small player group over a feature they had added in the game. The game design team really wanted this feature. When you defeat an enemy, I think the corpse becomes an obstacle that you have to overcome. They thought it really enhanced the gameplay. A very small but very vocal element of their audience did not like this and were very strong to review bomb it. So the designers kind of listened to this feedback and struck a balance. They set the corpse mechanic as the default option, but they gave players the chance to disable it within the settings of their own game. So as part of this, having the option to get feedback, to get that kind of critique from your audience, ideally meaningful, actionable critique, and not just internet comments, is good. But then being able to adapt things via updates, patches, and rebalancing is great. This is not an excuse to put out something that is not finished or not developed, but as a means to fine-tune things, as a means to kind of keep improving things through that iterative process that inclusive design relies on. Next up, if you all remember this particular owl, is to set and maintain a clear control structure. I think I understand what Nintendo was going for when this game came out. For those who may not be familiar with Ocarina of Time, you would play through a good portion of the game, and then a friendly bird would info dump on you for about 10 screens worth of text. And it was that time where the yes-no prompts to progress or repeat that you had gotten used to through the entire game so far were swapped for little to no reason, thus causing years of frustration in young gamers and modern-day speedrunners alike. So the changing or breaking of mechanics, especially for arbitrary means, is really something to disenfranchise your player base. There is a way for that to happen meaningfully. You can tie elements into that. Games where the UI or the controls are a part of the experience are a fantastic example, but there has to be some reason behind it that is worth it to the player. Not just, oh yeah, I forgot to hit undo on that last one, boss. Anyway, ship it out the door, ship it out the door. Next up, as we said so many times, is to use it as a platform to feature diversity, either in what's represented in the game on the screen or in the design behind it. A quote here that I love to use from Gordon Bellamy from the Netflix High Score documentary is that for marginalized people, a lot of energy is devoted to justifying your existence in spaces. So when you see yourself as the default and you are represented as that default out-of-the-box option, it has real impactful meaning. We've spoken a lot about how meaningful that is to see yourself represented in a game. And as Leo said a little while ago about people who need accessibility options, it's great when you don't have to burn as much energy for your needs and for your space in that realm. As Monica has also been talking, as of 2022, the average video game tester was a 43-year-old person who looks an awful lot like me. So kind of broadening that range and spectrum is fantastic.
I do want to say, if you are not a 43.2-year-old white male, please consider sign up for playtest. You will get paid. It's really fun. And as someone who spent a lot of time getting playtest data, I would love to see more people.
Do you accept 35.2-year-old white males? Yay, cash money. So again, from 2022, a few surveys were done that the vast majority of game characters in games are white males, and that at that time, the most diverse video game on the market was actually Apex Legends, with a range of 8 female-presenting characters, 7 male-presenting characters, and 1 non-binary option. I cross my fingers that these stats have improved since then, but come check in again with us next year, and we'll follow up on that. Just a few final points are to promote agency and autonomy in the choices in the game. I remember with Glee, the first day that I was able to skip a catching tutorial in a Pokemon game. They're great for people who have it as an onboarding option, but if it's your 8th Nuzlocke attempt, you just really want Professor What's Their Tree to get out of your way, so you lose your first critter. Another big thing is having tutorials that are relevant, such as the Breath of the Wild Great Plateau area. Everything you need to learn to play the game is taught to you there in a safe-to-fail range. And this goes into older games such as Super Mario Brothers and even the Mega Man series, where getting through that first level does the job of teaching you how to play the game. Nintendo has had countless talks and resources on the design of their Mario levels and how just making it through the end of World 1-1, you know how to move, you know how to jump, you know about enemies and power-ups and losing lives. And I think, y'all are familiar with Egoraptor, I assume. So the Mega Man X review that he did and talking about how that intro level does a great job of teaching you what's different in the series. You can charge your weapon, you can wall jump, and it's all there from left to right without any additional features needed. So, casting it again to you all, what game or games have been the most impactful to you from the perspective of accessibility, diversity, and inclusivity? You can choose one of those, you can choose all 3 of those, you can choose a different one. We would just love to hear what has left an impact on you.
I know for me it might sound like a strange one, but Pokemon Crystal meant a lot to me when I was a little one, because for the longest time you could just play as a boy, and then suddenly you could play as a girl. And I grew up in an area that wasn't particularly kind to people who were assigned female at birth and played video games. So it was very affirming to me to have the female protagonist.
To the Chili Dog comment, the theme of MAGFest this year is very adjacent to Chili Dog consuming game characters. Hence, why I made that meme. Probably way past my bedtime.
I have an experience, a very meaningful experience when I played Dream Daddy, because at the time you don't really see queer relationship that mature into having families, and you see a lot of queer relationship in their teen and 20s. And I was getting older. I am still getting older, and it's being able to see queer people in middle age and older and having kids is so inspiring and so interesting to play.
Go ahead, Leo.
I loved someone put the comment about I forgot what Pokemon game you mentioned. Having the option to change that halfway through, when you found out that you were trans. I just think that's why it's important to have those options. So they really need to have it in more games. Also, recognizing Overwatch and its diverse characters, it's just so awesome. I'm sorry, Casey, what were you saying?
I was going to say that when we were preparing for this panel, and then after this timer winds down, we'll hop along. Leo and I had the opportunity to speak to some really great inclusivity experts, Rahime Ramazani and then Bella Gaitan. And a lot of what both they said, kind of along the same topics that we had, was that the idea of having authentic representations of characters and cultures in your game, it's one thing to have it there, but the true goal is to make it an accurate, realistic, honest portrayal of the people that it is either showcasing or at least inspired by. So having, I saw it way earlier, having black hair options in such as games, or more authentic hairstyles for peoples of diverse backgrounds, having those real representations of folks is a key thing to have in mind, rather than just slap a different colored coat of paint on it and call it good, get it out the door.
Also, as someone who has worked as cultural consultant, please hire cultural consultant early. Most of the project I've consulted on is like, oh, we're about to ship in 2 months, and here is all the game, and let us know if there's anything problematic. And at this point, it's like I cannot tell them to redo the game, so I can only give them like suggestions that is doable in a month of time before shipping, but that's very limited, and a lot of time you see like character that feels kind of jarring as a result. So please hire cultural consultant early in the development instead of like as like afterthought last minute.
I think for for all of our specialties, one of the big running things is do this work as early as you can, or at least get it on your board of tasks as early as you can, so you can keep it in mind throughout and not just tacking it on at the end. We got just a little bit left. I see that we are encroaching on / past our time, so we will scurry along. Thank you all so much again for your patience and focus with us. So how do we actually do these things? Well, legal researchers Chenoweth and Marks, as I've greatly abridged here, have quoted and outlined ways to do some good, strong resistance to larger administrations that could use a little more progressive thought, and largely along the line of organization and community building. One of the big long-term goals for this is to try to find and build resources and strength so that there can be a vocal force to push back or gently encourage this change continually, consistently, and in an organized and direct fashion. Smaller action points that we all can do as individuals. We encourage you all to adopt the principles of what we've been talking about in your own work, whether it be game design, whether it be instructional design, whether it be basket weaving design. Whatever you do, if you can take something away from this, try to add these elements into it in your interactions, in your work, and similar. But the key caveat of do as much as you can, when you can, as safely as you can. We all want to try to progress these values, but we all have to take care of ourselves while doing so. We encourage you to support organizations such as the following. There are many more, and check our resource sheet at the end, but Able Gamers, Safe in Our World, and Queerty Gamers are good representations of groups that are trying to make these changes. And here at MAGFest, this is the first year that we had the Magpie Nest, the Mag Place for Inclusive Equity. Thank you so much. I worked right next to them, and I somehow forgot that. But if you're interested in them, send them an email, magpie@magfest.org. They blew it out of the water this year, and I am sure that they will be back in years to come. They're a great group, and it's a great cause. Finally, we encourage you all to continue to stay abreast of accessibility, diversity, and inclusivity initiatives, and listen to the marginalized voices within and without your community to understand their perspective and to ultimately try to act on it when you can and when it is your place to do so.
So if you're a software development or game development, these are the questions I would recommend you to ask your team. Again, do it earlier is usually better, both because it helps you get a direction, but also in my experience in game development, almost every project, you in midpoint, half of the team are burned out. And when you're burned out, the last thing you want is to add more things to do on your plate. So the first question is, who is your target audience, and what's your target like player profile? I'm not saying your target audience is like people who play Dark Souls, but rather like who are they as human, what their lifestyle is, how much time do they have playing game every day, do they have a job, do they have a family? These are the questions, and like talking to people who you want to sell the game to and getting to know them as human can help you get a lot of insight about like what feature is important to include in the development. And who are you excluding with your design? I'm not saying every game needs to be inclusive for everyone, but I do want to encourage every game developer to be mindful what their like design are excluding and make that decision whether that's something you're okay with. Another thing is like, what are the sensory motor requirements to play your game? This kind of goes back to like playing game in a language you don't speak, or playing game without sound, or without, or like image. And to get an idea, it's like, what are the sensory, like, or motor skill you need to finish this game? And then it helps you understand what accessibility feature do you need to make the game more accessible to player who may not have like those skills. And the psychological trigger is another way. Another thing is like, I would recommend consulting with a mental health specialist or like having a play test with a diverse player to understand. I have recently found out one of our design may cause like discomfort for people with claustrophobia. And that was something I wouldn't know because nobody on our team has claustrophobia. But when we do like a lot of play testing, we see player avoiding going into certain area. That gave me an idea like, oh, this is an issue we have to address in order to like ship our game. So these are the questions I recommend. And I just recommending having a conversation with your team and to find people, because the chance of likelihood is you have someone in your team who are very passionate about certain topic accessibility, and use them and listen to them and let them help you to make your game more inclusive. How can you do better? Compassion. Compassion is like the good starting point for everything, and having playtests with a diverse audience, as we said earlier, a lot of playtesters, and this is a thing we've noticed, is if we just put out a playtester, be like, play our game, you are attracting people who already like your game and who are just really excited to meet you, but not necessarily a good playtest candidate. So one thing we find useful is working with able gamers and working with different agencies to recruit players who may not necessarily sign up from playtesting through like a company social media post. Talk accessibility inclusive earlier. I have never worked on a project where we have extra timing production scope. That is a fantasy I have. Maybe one day I'll happen. So what happened is if your like inclusivity accessibility feature is a P3, like we will get to it when we have time. You will never have time to get to it. So having this as part of your production and having accessibility inclusive feature development as part of the production scope can help you avoiding issues like that. Listen to authentic voice, interview people who like cultural consultant are good, and like also just interview players who have like who you want to target, and because talking to the people who you are trying to represent is much more useful than like try to like get a sense from like TVs and pop cultures, because we have so many tokenization in pop cultures, and sometimes if you use that as reference, that like become a bad thing. Play a lot of games. Just play a lot of games. I recommend play games. Don't just only play the game within the genre you want to make, but play games that you may not pick up as a player, but as a game developer, I'm very aware there's games I would like to play as a player, and there's a game I feel I should play as a game developer.
So resources. Whip out your mobile device and scan the QR to look at it now. Take a picture of this and use the URL if you want a copy of this to access later. There is a full PDF of this presentation there. There's a link to our citations, our contact info, and other resources that we've mentioned are all shared here. I will leave this up until it looks like everyone has gotten what they want to need from it. Again, scan it to look at it now. Take a picture and use the URL to look at it later. Moving along in 3, 2, 1. Hope you guys got it. Contact us. Follow Leo and Monica. Listen to what they have to say. Follow me if you want to see who I follow, because I have little to say online. Give Quill a follow, please. She could not be here in person, but she is a fantastic cosplay artist and an amazing advocate for diversity initiatives. And if you don't find us on one of those handles on one social media site, try another site and try something close. We're on a good smattering of them. I think Blue Sky is the most active one at the moment. And this is all in those resources guides anyway. Thank you all so much for playing with us this morning. I think we may need to get off here because there is an event coming in after us, but if you all have any questions or anything for whatever our individual time is, we'll hang around. We'd love to chat. Thank you guys so much, MAGFest. This has been absolutely wonderful.
Thank you.
Thank you.